marketing is going to be big consumers of AI. I think that's definitely true. But the difficulty that marketing's always had is that they've had a more complex data story, and it's because they have more data, but they also have it in more different forms, and they've also had it in different applications. So they've had a plumbing issue. Marketing, I guess we can say we, for years, and that's really what CDP was supposed to solve. And the issue is it's not marketers' faults. It was just what happened over time. They had to adapt to something which is very difficult to predict, which is customer behavior.
Hi, I'm Greg Stewart, CEO of MMA Global, the international nonprofit trade association for CMOs who are focused on architecting a new future of marketing.
I'm Rex Briggs, an author, market researcher, measurement inventor, and entrepreneur.
I'm Greg Stewart, CEO of MMA Global.
I'm Rex Briggs, an author, marketing researcher, entrepreneur, and chief AI officer at Claritas. And this is Decoding AI for Marketing.
So Rex, listen, I've said this a bunch and I'll say it again here, I guess. Listen, marketing is probably the area that's going to be changed the most rapidly because of AI, right? I mean, we heard that at the event you and I went to last year. I think you and I have known that. I think we both also know that there's a lot of inefficiency in marketing that really could be improved upon. But listen, an interesting reason behind that, and beyond kind of what we've talked about in past episodes, might be that just AI runs on data, right? I mean, that's sort of the fundamentals of this thing. That marketers often have more data on users than any other part of the organization. And, we would hope that they really truly understand customers, right?
Yeah, and Salesforce, the company where our guest works on strategy, is a great example of that. The Salesforce Customer Data Platform, or CDP, for those of you who love acronyms, has been around for a handful of years and is having a huge impact on all kinds of experiences. And the company's shift to focusing on the data cloud across functions happened over time, starting with marketers who were the original customers because they had so much data. And really thinking about salespeople, they had a need to track each of the conversations and engagements they were having and tracking, which automatically generates data. Salesforce, you have such a great amount of data. I was a personal user of it. And one of the things that I really saw early on was, wow, you give people ultimate flexibility to create any variable they want, any category they want. And then you have this multi-tenant framework where everybody's data is in a cloud, but it's completely separated. And it got me to think when I saw AI come up, how are they going to be able to pull together all this information and data when people have totally different structures, labeling, they mean different things in the data. That's a big challenge, number one. And then number two, am I comfortable with you using my data to learn from other data and to learn a category? If I am, there's big power that can come out of it. But if I'm not, how do you pull that part off? So I think you guys came up with the trust layer as a way of being able to make a big leap. And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, we had to react to large language models, and the question is how to incorporate it into products. That's a big question. I think even before that, in terms of the data cloud, the insight there was around customer data platform, which is highly related to what you were saying, is that we needed a way. Salesforce CRM, so listeners who don't know, founded 20 years ago. Sales Cloud started, then it was Service Cloud. So it's customer relationship management, contact centers, tools for salespeople. It was relational databases. It's structured data, highly structured data for the most part. I mean, there are call center transcripts that we started to look at and so on. But the CDP appeared, and that the whole point of a CDP is that you can bring in data from outside other vendors. It can be, transactional data, it can be analytical data, it can be in all kinds of forms. It can be unstructured, it can be structured, and put it in a lake. So we had to build. Data Cloud is built on a data lake or a lake house, more technically. So it literally you do land raw data in any form into it, and that was new. I mean, that was net new when we launched our customer data platform. There's also something called Hyperforce underneath it, which is a multi-substrate kind of infrastructure for putting this lakehouse on top of it. But that's kind of another project that has been evolved over the years at Salesforce. But this lakehouse exists, and we needed that. And what that changes then the introduction of the ability to handle data in different formats is unstructured, essentially. So it's big data, it's raw data, and it is conformed to a data model in the data cloud. When AI came along, so the way we think of AI in our products is there's three layers to AI. There's the data layer, which is data cloud. Then there's the model, so the modeling that's put on top of the data, and then there's the UI on top. So the UI is the thing literally that someone will log into in the morning. And we wanted that to be Salesforce, obviously. The data layer would be Data Cloud. And then the model in the middle, so you were asking the question about the multi-tenant and so on. The model in the middle, we realized, can take different forms. And it can be the customer's choice. But the real challenge that we had, and this was last summer, I remember I was sitting around with a bunch of CMOs and I was saying, how do you feel about generative AI? And they were excited, but then I'm like, well, are you going to start using it? And they were like, no, we're scared of this. We don't know what's going to come out the other end. I can't just push a button and send these, have a computer write notes to my customers. So we realized there was a need for guardrails around these models. So the models do sit out, there are different, we have a large language model that's Salesforce trained, but there's also OpenAI, there's also Anthropic, there's also Cohere, Google has one, Amazon has one. We don't want to pick a model, we're not going to, but these are external models and the weights have been developed, billions of data points and trillions of data points, and they've been developed externally. And we want to be able to use that. But how can you make use of an external model for your corporate needs, whether it be marketing or the call center or commerce, product recommendations? And the answer is that you need very strict guardrails, and that's why we have this thing called the trust layer, and it has components to it. One, the obvious ones are detecting toxicity in the output, detecting bias in the data or the output. Your data can be very biased. But the most important one to me is data leakage. So having ways to prevent data leakage out of the corporate wallet. The most important one to me is what we call grounding. And that is taking the model and retraining it, conditioning it based on first party data, based on your own data. And the reason to do that, the simple example in marketing is when I send a corporate email out, sales email, promotion, whatever, it sounds like my brand. I have probably a whole agency just focusing on what does my brand sound like. And I can't just have a model write it unless they know what my brand sounds like. And the only way to do that is to train it on your own data. So that's a simple example, but we had to make it possible to do that. And that's what the trust layer is all about. It's kind of mediating these external models and then the internal use of the models. Yeah.
You're on mute, Greg.
Sorry about that. Hey, Marty, I'm kind of curious. How would they make the decision on some of these different models if they were forced to do that?
Oh,
What's
which
the
one to use?
process? Bring it back to marketers or business at large
Yeah.
if you want.
We have different architectures. So one is it's called trusted and shared. So we have an arrangement with OpenAI. They seem to be the most popular, the most mature, and it's API access. And we have a deal where it's zero. We call it zero retention. So the arrangement is that no data will leak out. It won't be used to retrain GPT-5 or whatever. So, and that is basically API. So it's like you have your own data sitting over here, the model sitting over here, and you're kind of pinging back and forth, and it's trusted and shared. You can also have a model hosted in our environment because these external models are hosted elsewhere. They're not sitting, in your. You can have basically a per tenant model, and that's Salesforce hosted, and that can be a Salesforce large language model, as I said. It could be Anthropic or DeepMind or one of these others. And that's kind of self-hosted. That would be more if someone's not comfortable maybe with trusted and shared for whatever reason, or they have especially sensitive data and they have kind of legal reasons not to want to send it anywhere through an API. That could happen. And then there's also an idea of bringing your own model, which is you have a data science team and they're basically building their own. These would be mostly predictive models, not large language models, but they could be mini versions of large language models. And you can build it externally and then just import the model into your data. There's a way to do that. And then there's also bring your own large language model. So some companies now are exploring training their own versions of these. And they're not as resource intensive as they used to be, and that keeps changing all the time. So it becomes easier and easier to actually build your own large language model. And we foresee a time when enterprises might, have their own versions or flavors of it. And we're already seeing this in real estate, in healthcare. There are healthcare-focused LLMs, Archify in finance, Nabla. I've heard about a few luxury presence in real estate.
So you
Yeah,
think
there were
marketers are,
just
are But are
Or,
marketers or
or-
CMOs going to have to be making their own decision on models someday? I mean, it feels a little beyond the scope of where marketers go right now. That's what I'm asking.
Oh, how do they decide? It'll be, in terms of the technical details, that's always left to the experts, the data science
Yeah.
team or whoever. But I do think that the output is what matters. It's sort of the use case and the output, and they'll be able to test the different versions. They'll say, let's try this, we'll try this, and do we feel more comfortable with this, this workflow or this model or this price, frankly. So there'll be a lot of, it's like any other technology decision, I would say.
Okay.
we just went through an example like that with one of the CAP studies, Greg, with MMA Global, where we're using Gen AI to create ads for the marketer. And they're audio, they're scripts. They start as scripts, and then they have
Yep.
synthetic voices and synthetic music. And initially, the company wasn't comfortable with the data being from one of the more advanced services, and so we said, okay, well, we'll start off by turning on Meta's open source Llama model. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
GPT-3, but it's definitely not GPT-4. And so
Mm-hmm.
after they, tried that for a week, they're like, "Hey, could we try the 4 one again?" And an hour later, like, "Oh, this is so much better. We're so excited about this." But it's a lot more expensive, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you pay a lot more per token, but you get more power. So there are all these trade-offs of, if you have a trust layer, are you comfortable with that alone?
Yeah.
So I think it's great that you're giving people choice in terms of how they approach it and make it really
Mhm.
flexible. What are some of the main workflows that you're seeing people build with these, like the big wins that you're seeing marketers have when they turn these on?
Well, we have the Copilot, which is not. I mean, it's what you think it is. It's sitting there. It's a little assistant. And what we realize there is that in order for large language models AI to be useful to B2B software users, so people who log into our products and other products, they have to be in the flow of work. So they have to be kind of incorporated into what people are doing every day. And it would vary by your function. But we do have a list of use cases that keep coming up over and over again. In marketing, it is like write subject lines for emails so I can test them. Give me suggestions for subject lines that might work based on what has worked in the past. And then also body copy and imagery. So content generation in a very controlled world. Email is a very good place to start. You can also do it with text. You can do it with website copy for SEO. And then on the commerce side, product descriptions are a very kind of low-hanging fruit, very, very useful use of the LLMs. They are great at churning out 100,000 SKUs of product descriptions, where if you went to your creative team and said, give me 100,000 descriptions, their eyes would fall out of their head and they would quit. And then on the call center side, doing summaries of calls, like these models are very good at summaries, summarizing interactions and then doing suggested next steps. We have examples of when a call center agent is on the phone with somebody and they're resolving a call. The co-pilot can suggest topics of conversation that could maybe lead them to an upsell or a cross sell, and that worked. But we had a customer, Gucci, who was one of our early adopters, and they had a call center. Uh, they had a model built that was Guccified, so it would Guccify the voice. So they actually had sentences written out for the call center agent to read, or to paraphrase, that sounded like their kind of the luxury voice. And even if you were a new call center agent, you would end up sounding like Gucci and make it more likely to retain that customer. So there are common use cases depending on the user, the different personas.
Hey, 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 Marty, can you do a little Gucci-fied voice for us? I'm just kind of curious.
I can't, and it's in an Italian accent. My accents are not so good, but it's very
Oh, okay,
luxury
okay,
though.
okay. I
Very
guess,
luxury.
yeah, very. I think you're right. You just
Very
extend all the
beautiful.
words
Yes.
like you're speaking richly. I think is what you've just said.
Yeah, you want to give just the
That's
right
it.
tone to it all.
Hey, and by the way, just when you say that, so the direction from some of this is just so I'm clear on the Gucci one. Is this showing up in the copy that's being used in text, or you're talking you're actually changing the service center's voices, audio? Is that what you?
No,
Is that what
not
you just
yet.
said?
No, and it's not synthetic voice. It's
Okay.
the call center agent. The way these uh, the way the agents operate, and it's different in different companies, but they'll call up a screen and they'll have, usually when they're talking to someone, they'll
Yep.
have that record in front of them, and it's dynamic. So it'll show, previous cases. It might even show marketing interactions. It'll
Hmm.
show customer lifetime value, and then there'll be an interactive screen with like suggestions for a cross sell and upsell. So they're reading off a screen as they go along.
Yeah. Okay.
And also some of them, will detect tone of voice and how angry is this person and that kind of thing. They get a lot of data.
Very
But that's
powerful.
why, yeah, I mean, it
Well,
is customer
Marty, let's go back.
experience, and I think that's where it's going. It's not siloed. It's
Yeah.
not marketing, it's service and commerce are three different teams and three different countries and three different databases. It should be, tightly linked.
Yeah. Well, Marty, you probably wouldn't know this, but listen, the MMA's done a lot of work around, listen, there's three core marketing strategies out there. There's brand, there's transactional like DTC, and customer experience is a third. There's only three marketing strategies in total. They can be combinations and everything. But the analysis that the professors we've worked with have done has said that the brands, the companies with the best financial performance are those who make customer experience their primary marketing
Mm.
strategy. Isn't that interesting? So regression analysis that they've done over a massive data set to sort of assess that that's best. I mean, I think if you ask a lot of marketers, they think brand is number one, but that's actually not the case.
No, I'm sure you're right. I was just at last week, the Dentsu Summit. They have a kind of futuristic summit every year, and I went to that, and a lot of it was around that. The whole theme was customer experience, and they had done some research,
Oh,
which looked really good actually, and they basically more or less proved that people will pay more for a better experience, and there's actually significant financial benefit to having what they call a good experience. The other thing they noted, which I thought was really interesting, is that people are getting more demanding. So the incidence of dissatisfaction, or what they called customer rage, is going up based on smaller and
yep.
smaller stimuli. So we're getting much more picky than we used to be.
Or maybe
I
we're
can
just
see.
We
expecting to
expect
get
more.
what we pay for.
Yes.
Yeah, well, expect more. I think we expect the basics
Maybe you're
because if
right.
you
Maybe
ask
you're
me,
right.
I would say that I think the rage is well placed and
We
appropriate
put up
for
with a lot in the
most
past.
companies
Maybe
I
you're
end up
right.
dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just not going to tolerate. Well, listen, let's go back to that for a little bit, Marty. So, listen, let's talk a little bit about customer. You kind of started off there with CDPs and customer experience, same thing, customers. Um, and talk a little bit about sort of Salesforce
Mm.
here. So, as you think about that end-to-end experience and the individual users, whereas your customers are big business, you're also very fixated on sort of what about consumer facing. Is this Gucci example of that? Do you have other examples of what it means to actually take a big enterprise and have it be customer facing too?
I mean, it's not a glamorous conversation usually, because most customers will start with, you know, the end goal, and they're like, all right, I need that. But really, these problems are solved much farther down the technology stack, and they actually go way down to the data layer. And I think that it's been a good thing. The category of CDP is very complicated, and there's 146 of them and so on. But I think just in general, having companies focused around organizing their customer data has been very good. And marketing, you mentioned earlier, marketing is going to be big consumers of AI. I think that's definitely true. But the difficulty that marketing's always had is that they've had a more complex data story, and it's because they have more data, but they also have it in more different forms, and they've also had it in different applications. So they've had a plumbing issue, marketing. I guess we can say we, for years, and
Mhm.
that's really what CDP was supposed to solve. And the issue it's not marketers' faults. It was just what happened over time. They had to adapt to something which is very difficult to predict, which is customer behavior. I mean, we didn't know when the smartphone, like the iPhone, appeared, that it would take off within a month, and you'd have to have an iPhone app by October. That's literally true. It launched in August, you need one. No one knew. We think we do now looking back, but at the time, nobody knew that would happen.
We,
So.
we didn't we didn't know apps were going to be the center of our phone.
No, and,
Yeah,
and we didn't know that the iPhone would take off so quickly. And so consumer
yeah.
behavior, social networks, back remember the 90s. Who would predict that, we would share so much on on these social networks? Nobody. So at any rate, that's the challenge.
Nobody.
And then we had,
Agreed.
because of SaaS software, you have an ability to get applications very quickly and easily. And so that's the issue. So I think over time, marketers recognize this challenge first. But now enterprises have woken up to it, and the fact that data management, data organization has such a outsized influence on the conversation wherever we go, and also on budget as well. The investment in things like data science, but also data data storage, and now AI is just outrageous. I mean, it's very good investment, but it's become very significant. And so I think that's really where the conversation is starting, and it's getting more more important, more confusing as time goes on. But it's expanded beyond
I,
marketing,
I,
as I've said. Yeah,
I want to ask a somewhat challenging question,
yeah,
perhaps. When you think about the data and privacy, and you think about GDPR, California's legislation, more and more states passing it, how is it going to work with AI when someone says, "I have the right to be deleted," but the model's already been trained on their transcripts from their meetings and so forth? How does that? I mean, it's so expensive to rerun the model and recalculate it. What's the? Is there a kind of fair use basis, or what are we going to do as an industry with that?
it's um, it's not an easy question to answer, and I think it's being worked out. It's not actually even being worked out in the courts now. It's being worked out sort of at the legislative level. The discussions are happening. So the question is a good one. These models are trained based on data, and presumably somebody owned the data. New York Times is suing OpenAI because they said you used, past issues of the New York Times. OpenAI might say, well, it's fair use, and then the New York Times comes back and say, well, if you use all of the New York Times, it's not really fair use, is it? And so I'm not an attorney. I don't know what the answer is, but from a Salesforce perspective, we're using these external models, so they're trained on whatever data they're trained on, and nobody really knows. They know part of the data, but nobody knows exactly. Then when you train it on your own first-party data, you need to have consent, and you have a kind of a data lineage, like a trail. And there's also ways to aggregate the data, aggregate it up, and then add noise. So you can sort of do obfuscation so that when it's used to train the model, it's impossible to use that model in any way to identify exactly um, uh, information related to a single data point. So you can't kind of back calculate down to an individual, even though you've used that individual's data to train the model. And it involves, you have a less accurate model ultimately because you're not using exactly the data that you use that you put into it. But on the other hand, it is more privacy safe. So there are ways to get around that. Companies are taking different stances. Some of them are saying we'll just rerun the model. Some of them are saying we don't have a data deletion problem, so it'll be okay. Some of them are having very contained uh, data sets. So they're, data sets that they think are much less likely to be deleted and stuff like that. There's many roads to the rainbow. But you're right. I mean, consent and actually tracking that as metadata in the customer data model itself is really, really critical. I think a lot of the cookie, discussion has been good for that because before cookies, cookie deletion 2020 and GDPR, most of our customers weren't talking about data privacy in the US, maybe in Europe, but now it's basically all they talk about besides AI.
Well, it's interesting. We did a study with Syracuse University. We're just in the middle of analyzing it, but we asked the students how important their privacy was when we uh, thought about AI, and I think it only got like to somewhat
Yeah,
important. It wasn't very important or extremely important. It didn't quite get not important at all, but it was just barely above not important at all. I mean, these are college students, and I think
Yeah.
that there's a generational difference. But I was really surprised that it wasn't higher because they just had an experience where they rated that the AI really got to know them really, really fast.
mhm,
So I would have thought that they would have been more concerned. But I think your point about data lineage is an important one for listeners to
yeah,
think about, because if you have transcripts from call centers and so forth, those uh, are connected to an individual record. And if that person later on says, "I want my data deleted," then presumably I think what you're doing of adding noise, so you're basically saying, that isn't that person's record anymore. That is an amalgamation of other information. That's going to be a really interesting. I think that's probably a good strategy. It'll be an interesting point to see if that gets litigated and where that
and
lands.
I think from a
Yeah, and
consumer,
I'm not so sure too that we don't. Mark, I'm not so sure that that we don't know that you're not going to be able to figure out personally. I was a part of a Lucent Technology spin out a number of years ago, focused on deep packet inspection. And if you don't know what that is, that's actually the definition that the technologists foolishly came up with to describe basically sitting on the wire and seeing everything that was going through the pipes of an internet service provider. Terrible, terrible name, but
Sounds like
nonetheless, kind of
wiretapping.
says what it is. Well, in fact, the biggest issue that we had in the company was making sure that we managed around wiretapping laws. Absolutely, Marty, it was a very big issue. There were two-party consent states, but the issue was funny about that is that we were very easily able to determine who an individual was without having any records from them
Mm.
directly, because inevitably people type in their own name, they search for themselves on the internet. It was not hard to accumulate a massive understanding at an individual level. So I wonder if we're going to have that same issue here.
Well, from a consumer perspective, I think I mean, maybe we're more sophisticated, I would hope, but most people, they only notice privacy violation when it's obvious. And I think something like retargeted advertising
Hmm.
makes it so clear. You're like, I just was on this website, now I'm somewhere totally different and I'm seeing an ad for this product. Someone's following me,
Yeah,
that freaks people out.
yeah.
But the idea of a model being trained on data that may be obscurely related to something, it's, I think, maybe less exciting for people. It's harder to figure out. I do think
Do you see
well,
a
the other
world?
thing is
Oh, go
we're
ahead.
going into this world now where these large language models work so not just on text, but in terms of segment discovery and all kinds of analytical uses, and they're generating great outputs. You're like, wow, this is a great segmentation scheme, but they're very hard to explain. Like if you're trying to figure out how did it come up with this, it's getting harder and harder to do that just because it's so complex on the inside. It's sort of opaque. And so that's the world we're going into. I think we're going to have to trust them more.
Do you see a world where we don't have as many middle layers of management translating
Mm.
because the AI can do more of that, and or a world where we see some of these traditional silos between different functions in marketing becoming more fluid? Or
No
describe
doubt.
where you think the
Yeah.
world should be in the next 36 months or longer.
Well, it's different. I mean, I try to be optimistic, and 'cause McKinsey's done a lot of studies around AI in the workforce and hiring for AI. And their prediction, I think, was that 30% of employee time in most big companies would be freed up by 2030. So there's two ways to look at that. One is, 30% of my time I can do other things, more value add. The other way to look at it is I can get rid of 30% of my staff because then I'll be as efficient as I was before. So there's many, I don't know which way it'll go, but I think it will depend very much on the company. There's going to be, we already see this friction being removed. I think just moving from in the marketing department, the email team and the web team and the social team being separate, working on the same, customer data and the CDP, has brought them together. And then it's already happening, not a lot of places, but some places, marketing and the call center, marketing and service are closer together than they used to be because they're calling out the same data and they can see visibly, what has happened in the other side of the house. They can see what the marketers are doing and so on. So I think you're right. And then as this gets more and more automated, the software itself will be doing a lot of those joins because the companies ultimately that have better CX, better customer experience will do better. So they'll be the leaders. They'll have more money to invest. And so, the ones who don't pull this off will either go out of business or they won't do as well, or, you know, they'll have to get their act together.
Hey, Marty, how much pressure? I know you guys had Einstein within Salesforce, but how much pressure? And I'm not sure pressure is the right word. Maybe it's direction. I don't know. Choose whatever you want. Is Salesforce getting to build more AI into the tools that you have? Because listen, I mean, we use Salesforce here at the MMA. It's a very cumbersome product. It feels like to
Oh,
me.
that's changing. Yeah. And there's two ways. I mean, I think of bringing AI into the product and then bringing the product to AI. So bringing the product to AI is, unleashing, letting people build models elsewhere and then run it on the data sitting in the product. But there's another way to bring AI to the product to make it work better. And there's a lot of that's what the Copilot's supposed to do. But I think that we also have
Mhm.
things like we built in a voice interface to the product. It's an early stage. Some of this is generally available, but basically now in the data cloud, for instance, I can describe a segment. I don't have to write SQL. I can just say get me people who have this income level and live in this area and so on. And in the past, I would have had to write SQL code, which means I needed a certain level of skill and I needed to probably make a mistake. But the code itself can write that now in the background, and that makes the tool a lot more easy to use. But also, it expands it to other users, so you can have the whole team have access and make their own segments, do their own testing. It's rolling out slowly, but I think definitely very quickly large language models will make most enterprise software easier to use. And it's already happening with chat now, and the Copilot. You can say something like pull my best lead, give me a list of my best leads for the past year, and then suggest promotion strategy, and it will do that pretty quickly. So it should
Okay.
make things
So
easier.
you have Copilot. So Copilot is what you call. I'm sorry. When you said Copilot earlier, I thought you were using that as a bit of a metaphor for Microsoft, who's kind
No,
of, I
it's the
thought,
same
owned
name.
that
Yeah,
name.
you're
But I
right.
guess,
Microsoft
yeah,
Copilot and then Salesforce
they
Copilot.
should go back to.
It's the same name.
Okay, yeah. I guess they should go back. Well, they should go back and start using Clippy again. I think
Clippy,
that would be
yeah.
probably better for everybody, right?
I remember Clippy. Yeah, it's the same idea, actually.
everybody, everybody does. I don't think there was any
Oh,
icon that was sort
Clippy.
of more hated than Clippy, by
They
the
were
way.
ahead
But
of their time.
Clippy was not helpful. Ahead of their
Clippy,
time with something that didn't work.
Clippy was beyond annoying. Exactly, it sort of represented everything you hated about Microsoft's products,
Well,
right?
Well, and that's the fear with AI. I mean, look, there are reports when in Arizona where self-driving cars really were started or given permission earlier on of people shooting at them, running them off the road. In San Francisco, people are putting cones on the hoods of the Waymos because it can't drive through a cone, so it doesn't know what to do. And there was one set on fire recently. I mean,
San
there is a bit of
Francisco,
a
I heard
backlash.
it's gotten really hostile on the self-driving car. I have heard that.
They really have. Come on,
that's the
man.
Luddites.
Give AI
It's
a break. But I
Oh,
mean,
come
sabotage.
it
on.
really.
It's like
I know. I see bias against AI, Rex. I think that's a problem we should go solve.
That is, somebody needs to stand up for the AI, and
Somebody's
maybe
got to
they'll
represent
remember
the
that we did
machines.
that for
Who's going to
them.
protect the machines from
Well, I
themselves,
think
right?
Mark Andreessen is right here. He's like, you can't fight it. You may want to stop it, but it's coming. So uh,
Yeah, we need somebody that coined the phrase. Who was it? Who was it who actually said to around privacy, like privacy, get over it? Who was that? It was the CEO of one of the big tech
yeah.
companies. I don't remember who it was off then. Yeah, maybe AI. Yeah, get used to it, I think, is the idea.
But I mean,
So
Salesforce are
on
very
that,
much like all in on this. It's like we think it's going to be great. You'd be crazy not to use it in a software product, and I think a lot of companies are that way. Microsoft has jumped on it,
so
but
Marty,
everyone
you
else.
have a lot of interest. You are a best-selling author like 4 times over. I've always enjoyed reading your column because you always give me a different way of thinking about things. Your interesting story about the history of the
Oh
cookie,
yeah,
which I was a very early user on at Wired. Um, I think that was the reason why it didn't get patented by an ad agency was because we had used it earlier enough at Wired that was what people used as prior art. Um, you have your podcast Paleo
AdTech.
was Ad Tech, where you were kind enough to have me on as a guest. Where I mean, just fascinating early history. When you think about the how the history will be written, the way that you're same thing that you're doing with Paleo Ad Tech for AI. What do you think are the most important innovations and moments that are happening right now? And what do you think is overhyped that we won't be talking about in 10 years from now?
Uh, I have some theories. One is that it's not these on the generative side. So everyone's excited about writing and art, and I don't think real moving art pieces and great literature will be created by these models. I think people will always be better at that, even though they may use these models to a certain extent. So I don't think that's where the excitement will be. I also think there's going to be a lot of robots writing for robots. There's going to be a lot of like self-talk. What I mean by that is like SEO, for instance. You're creating content on a site to be read by a robot, the Google search robot. So there's a lot of kind of, and in fact, I could write a single line and then ask my model to turn it into an email, and then I send it over to someone, and they have their model summarize it into a line, and so you have one line on one side. There's a lot of kind of noise in the system that I think is going to be ultimately useful, I suppose, for companies, but doesn't need people at all. So I think there's definitely been a massive breakthrough here. I think it will be not a step change. It will be incremental, and it will just improve, hopefully, the way products work, and it'll improve, consumer products and business products. It'll make the interface a lot more natural. So rather than coding, we'll be talking a lot, and this will be all be good. And I think that the negative side of it will be when they impersonate, when they pretend to be people, and there's a lot of danger there. But that's probably another topic. We're easily fooled, I think, people by fake people.
Hey, Hey, Marty, I'm kind of curious, given your kind of view of the world, your perspective, and all that you've accumulated, it is pretty impressive how much you know about this and just a broad ranging experience. I can see why Salesforce really appreciates you being there. Um, do you have like an orientation to like I don't know, if you were to pick a dream, a vision, something for the future, like, I tell you the question I get all the time for mobile, for you, you mentioned iPhone earlier, right? So for iPhone, the killer app clearly was Uber and all that Uber represented. I wanted to know what the car was. I wanted to be able to have timing on the thing. It was a representation of customer experience, a level we'd never seen, and servicing and bringing industries together in a massive sort of, in a massive marketplace. Do you have a sense where the killer app for AI is going to come from, what it might look like? What do you think it is?
I mean, the different phases of AI, there's the predictive, then there's generative, which is where we are now. And the next one is agents, sort of autonomous agents, I think. And then we'll get into
Okay.
like
Okay.
general AI and like they're smarter than we are, which is coming, not here yet,
Yeah.
luckily. But the autonomous agent is where we're going. And I think that will be a killer app because we'll have I could have a virtual agent who's out looking for deals for me. They know what I like because they know me really well. And so they'll eliminate a lot of the pain that I do, like shopping and not just
Yeah.
shopping, though, looking for information, finding newsletters that I would really like to read. And so I think that maybe that will be it. They'll be like a kind of like a
Do you know
That's
friend,
one
anybody
but
of
who's
not
the
really.
that's
Yeah.
That's actually one
I
of
think it
the startups we're funding, and I'm hoping to make a virtual Greg Stewart next. And we've enlisted his daughter to
a
help with some
a
of the coding on that.
actually, I think Rex was hired by my board to replace me. I think is specifically what's gone on here. They said, "Hey, can you
No,
build an
AI
agent
to
for this guy? Because he's."
represent you, not replace you. That's what we're aiming for with the
Oh,
Twin Z
oh, oh,
startup.
no, no, no. I've told the board that's my succession plan. Rex is building an agent for me. There we go.
That
Sort of
might
a
work.
newfangled
So, hey,
governance dynamic.
Marty, closing thoughts here. Help us land this
Mm.
plane. What should the listeners be doing immediately as their next steps with AI to help advance their careers, so they do have a succession plan and AI doesn't replace them?
Well, I think it's always important to understand how things work. So I think it's well worth people's time not just to use models, but to actually look into, in a general sense, how they work, how they do what they do, and that makes people like, for instance, I mentioned the data science class. I'm not a data scientist, but I have studied Python, and I feel much more comfortable when I'm talking to people about data science than I would have otherwise. So it's worth investing time and effort into slightly more technical sides of anything that you're doing. So I would recommend that.
I love it. Well, Greg, do you want to wrap us up here?
Yeah, I think it's that time. Let me see here. I guess that's this episode for Decoding AI for Marketing, right? I'm Greg Stewart.
I'm Rex Briggs. Be sure to catch all our episodes, plus subscribe, follow, rate, and review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can get transcripts and more information on our website, decodingaiformarketing.com. And to learn more about the MMA and membership options, go to MMAglobal.com. Thanks for listening.